the comment last week, as sometimes, as I say, you have to kind of bang that same gong occasionally to remind us this is not just some big idea that anything we do is okay. God uses flawed people. And I say that a lot, mostly because there needs to be a reminder of putting ourselves in that place of being used. It's not so that we can say, okay, everything is great, I got nothing to worry about. The fact that he uses flawed people means there's an opportunity for us to be used by God. And it's more than an opportunity, it's what we're supposed to do. So, sorry for the going off track, but I think it's important to say, and I do appreciate the comment on that.
And I just recorded halfway through that, so the people that get recordings are gonna.
That'll be puzzling.
Yes.
I'm glad you remembered it all, because I wouldn't have.
So where we stopped in the story was Dinah had been raped by Shechem, and her brothers sought revenge, and specifically Levi and Simeon killed all the men of Shechem, and at that point Jacob was not happy, and he was specifically not happy with Levi and Simeon, and he was also fearful that that they were visitors or sojourners in this specific place, and that they could be revenge could be taken on them now. That's where we left off. So we're on chapter 35. Then God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and settle there. Build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." And I wanted to share a screen real quick before we get started here to see where we are. So we're on the bottom of this map down here, and we see here that Jacob meets his brother Esau in Succoth. And then down here, Jacob makes his home in Succoth, Shechem, Bethel, and then Hebron. So we are in the bottom part of Israel.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea.
And that's that body of water at the bottom is the Dead Sea. The smaller one up above is the Sea of Galilee, and the Jordan that runs between them.
Okay.
And that reminder, build an altar to the God who revealed himself to you when you were fleeing your brother Esau. If you remember, Jacob had that dream in this place, and he said, you haven't gotten to the part yet where he says to get rid of all the idols?
No, not yet.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, so Jacob told his household and all who were with him, "Get rid of the foreign gods that are among you. Purify yourself and change your garments. Then let us arise and go to Bethel. I will build an altar there to God, who answered me in my day of distress. He has been with me wherever I've gone." So they gave Jacob all their foreign gods and all their earrings, and Jacob buried them under the oak near Shechem. As they set out, a terror from God fell over the surrounding cities, so they did not pursue Jacob's son. So Jacob and everyone with him arrived in Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. There Jacob built an altar, and he called that place El Bethel, because it was there that God had revealed himself to Jacob as he fled from his brothers.
So I don't know, most of you may not remember, but when Jacob was headed the other way and he has this dream, he says, when I come back here, God has said he's going to watch over me and he's going to bring me back. And when I get back here, I'm going to build a shrine to Yahweh. And here he is, he's doing what he said he was going to do. You notice he tells them to get rid of, you remember Rachel had stolen her father's household idols, these little, stone or wood idols. And he tells everybody, get rid of them. We serve and worship Yahweh. And so this is a common enough practice that he has to tell them. The earrings are We heard someone describe it
Amulets.
as amulets, that they would wear these things. They're a you know, sort of a pagan religious symbol. And rather than saying, you know, these are worth something, let's gather them all up and sell them to the people in the countryside, they bury them, including the earrings, and they have value. And I like that. What that says is, put them aside and bury them, you know, instead of looking at them as something of value. The idea of burying it says we're putting this away. Now, it doesn't last forever, they still slip back, but
And you'll remember just before that, after Levi and Simeon killed all the people in Shechem, then the rest of the brothers came in and they took the belongings of those people, and that would have been a Canaanite community, which would have been a pagan community. And so they probably got more foreign gods or idols and amulets there.
The one other thing, though, before we get that, we have to mention, they've come in and killed all these people over the situation with Dinah, but frankly, they wanted to. I mean, you see that, right? And then they looted the town. And Jacob tells them, you've angered all these people. If they get together, they're going to ride down and kill us. And so as they travel through this place, it says that God set a fear on the people in this area so that they didn't ride down on them and kill them. And you can see how that could easily have happened. In fact, it almost doesn't make sense that it didn't. If I had someone, or, you know, we as society had someone that had just come in and killed all the members of a family in a town, you're probably, you know, thinking right to say we need to get rid of them. So this is God's deliverance, and it's one little sentence, one little part of a sentence, and we gloss over these things, but they were in real trouble because of what those sons had done. And God provides. God, you know, made it possible for them to pass through and get to where they were supposed to go.
But the point isn't that God protected bad people. The point is God had a plan, and this is such a bigger part of a plan.
That's true. They were that, and there are consequences. But do you remember, as he was leaving, he has the dream, and Yahweh speaks to him in this dream, and he says, I'm going to watch over you. And I'm going to watch over you while you're gone, and I'm going to bring you back here. And he's watching over Jacob and his family. He's doing what he said he was going to do. And maybe that's another point in this, that God keeps his promises even when we don't. And I have seen personal evidence of that. So this deliverance, watching over Jacob, he promised it to him, and there you see evidence of it.
Now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel. So Jacob named it Allon Betkuth. After Jacob had returned from Pandan Aram, God appeared to him again and blessed him. And God said to him, though your name is Jacob, you will no longer be called Jacob. Instead, your name will be Israel. So God named him Israel. And God told him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation, even a company of nations, shall come from you, and kings shall descend from you. The land that I gave Abraham and Isaac, I will give to you, and I will give you this land to your descendants after you. Then God went up from the place where he had spoken with him. So Jacob set up a pillar in the place where God had spoken with him, a stone marker, and he poured out a drink offering on it and anointed it with oil. Jacob called the place where God had spoken with him Bethel.
And that's just sort of a review. If it sounds strange, it's just a review of what happened. And these things were written. The Bible, the Old Testament, is not chronological anyway. And so this is just sort of a reminder of what has happened. There is a thing that we have lost, in that he anoints, he sets up this pillar of remembrance to Yahweh, and then he anoints it with oil. And we've completely lost this idea of anointing. But Messiah, the Hebrew word Mashiach, means anointed. And it is a thing that has at least significance to people. And so this is a reminder that when Jacob was here before, he set up this pillar, and it confuses people. They want to think, well, did all this stuff happen a second time? No, just a review.
Later, they set out from Bethel, and while they were still some distance from Ephrath, Rachel began to give birth, and her labor was difficult. During her severe labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not be afraid, you are having another son." And with her last breath, for she was dying, she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar on her grave. It marks Rachel's tomb to this day.
So remember, Rachel is the wife that he loved. And that's such a sad thing. It's just we look at it and kind of bow up as maybe as we should, but she's about to have this baby. And there are bad complications. And you notice what the nurse says to her, the midwife, "Don't be afraid." That's something we hear through the Bible often. But what we're supposed to understand from this is that they know Rachel's dying. Rachel knows she's dying in this childbirth. And the midwife says, "Don't be afraid, you're having another son." You should see from that, we talk about it a lot, how important the lineage is. And you're dying. But the good news is you're having a son. You got one more. And you think how hard she has fought, competed with her sister and the servant women and everything else. So having another son is supposed to be comforting in this moment, but everybody knows this Rachel is dying from having this baby. And this will become the last of the 12 sons. And it will be the second, there are only two from Rachel, from the favorite wife. And as she's dying, she names him Ben-Oni, which means the son of my sorrow. And
Or son of my strength.
son of my, well, some people say that. I think but Benjamin is son of my strength.
Gotcha.
So I think that's why Benjamin is much clearer. Jacob says, yeah, we're not going to talk about the sorrow. This is the son of my strength.
Benjamin, it says, is son of my right hand.
Son of my right hand, which the right hand is your strength. So
Gotcha.
Anyway, so this becomes the final of the 12 sons and the 12 tribes.
And just to a refresher there, Leah, the oldest daughter of Laban, and the one Jacob was tricked into marrying first, had 6 sons and 1 daughter. Zilpah, which is Leah's maidservant, had 2 sons. Bilhah, who is Rachel's maidservant, had 2 sons. And now Rachel had 2 sons before she died. So we have 12 sons and 1 daughter. Now, the next sentence, I'm on verse 21, and it starts with the word Israel. So remember when Jacob wrestled with God, the angel, the vision, he was renamed Israel. So what becomes sort of confusing to me, but it's not confusing if we know the story, is in the next several chapters, sometimes Jacob is called Jacob, and sometimes Jacob is called Israel.
And I know there's some significance, and it just evades me. It switches back and forth between Israel and Jacob, and
It's
there's
the same person.
why would it switch back and forth? I would be willing to wager that there's a reason, and I just don't know what it is.
Israel again set out and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah, and Israel heard about it. I'll stop there.
Yep, it doesn't say any more about that. This is not a pleasant family thing. When they have family reunions, this is going to come up. And this is another one of those, there's a whole lot being said here. So Jacob has had 2 wives, and then he has children with the 2 maidservants, but then he has concubines. We are not advocating this behavior. We're not saying that because it happens, this is the way we should be, but he has concubines. Reuben comes in and sleeps with father's concubine. If you remember, that happens some other times. What that is a sign of dominance. That is by this point, he is more than a grown man. I think he's probably got to be in his 40s. And to do that is to sort of, what's an insult to the father, but it says, I'm ready to take over. We see those things happen like in a pride of lions, when the young one is ready to take over. That's the sort of thing that happens. This is an attempt at dominance of Jacob and saying he's the oldest and I'm ready to take things over. And it says that Israel found out about it. And we don't get told anymore, because he didn't have Reuben killed over it, which he was, entitled to do under their, sort of cultural laws, if you will, their rules. But there's a message here, and it says Reuben thinks he's ready to take over, and he's not.
And this next part of 35 is like another summary, if you will. The sons of Leah were Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Rachel's maidservant, Bilhah, were Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Leah's maidservant, Zilpah, were Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Paddan-aram. Jacob returned to his father Isaac at Mamre near Kiriath-arba, that is Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had stayed. And Isaac lived 180 years. Then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, old and full of years. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him.
So here's Isaac. And Isaac lives a sort of I don't want to say, nondescript, but he doesn't get into all the battles. He doesn't get in. And if you remember, when his wife is childless and she goes to him and says, Rebecca, and he says that you give me a child, or instead of doing what Jacob does, he prays. He goes to God about it. Isaac is kind of a neat guy. We need, and I said this when we were studying this week, we need more Isaacs in this world. And it says he died old and full of years. And that term gets used maybe 3 more times throughout there. But what it's saying is he lived a good life. He lived a good, full life. And this is actually sort of a compliment. In fact, it is. You're supposed to see from that Isaac lived a good, full life. And when it was time, he quit breathing. He gave up his spirit, and he was buried by his sons. That's it may be a small thing, but we're told stuff through here that we pass over. So Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob, the patriarchs.
The next chapter is chapter 36, and we're going to actually skip chapter 36 because it doesn't have anything to do with Jacob. It has to do with Esau, and it talks about Esau's lineage. But do you want to touch base on
we mentioned it? I'll say real quickly. I talked about this a few weeks ago, that we have the lineage of Esau. She was told there are 2 nations in your womb, and these 2 sons become the fathers of big nations, and Esau's people are Edomites.
And you see that on the very last lines of verse 37. Esau was the father of the Edomites.
Edomites, and they wind up at war with the Israelites all over the centuries. But what I mentioned before, if you weren't here for it, there's a direct lineage from Jacob down to Jesus. And actually Matthew recounts that. He starts with the genealogy. But there's also a direct lineage from Esau down to Herod. And it is almost shocking that those two wind up, the descendants wind up in the position that they're in with each other. All there, it's part of this long plan. And so, yeah, we don't want to go into the lineage of Esau. It's the Edomites and the Idumeans.
There's a lot of names that I couldn't
A lot of
pronounce.
names.
Chapter 37. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had resided, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. When Joseph was 17 years old, he was tending the flock with his brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph had been born to him in old age. So he made him a robe of many colors. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Then Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain in the field, and suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to mine. Do you intend to reign over us?" his brothers asked. "Will you actually rule us?" So they hated him even more because of his dream and his statements. Then Joseph had another dream and told it to his brothers. "Look," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." He told his father and brothers, but his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream that you have had? Will your mother and brothers and I actually come and bow down to you, down to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept in mind what he had said.
So this idea of dreams, and Joseph gets these dreams. If you remember, though, Jacob, his mother was given this vision, this dream, that the older son would serve the younger, that Esau would serve Jacob. And we see sort of a repeat of that. This is he's the second youngest, I think, maybe the youngest at this time, but he has this vision, this dream that indicates the other brothers are going to serve him, that he's going to be the preeminent one. And we're going to see that actually comes about. But just because there is a dream or a vision doesn't necessarily mean that you're supposed to share it with everybody. And maybe sometime I'll tell you a story about that. But what we see from Joseph is sort of the difference between intelligence and wisdom. Telling his brothers that is not a wise thing to do, and they hate him. And we see that Jacob loves one son more than the others. That's probably not a wise thing. And certainly making him this coat, it's sort of a royal looking garment. Jacob sets his son up for this. That kind of ostentatious display of saying, "I favor this son over all the rest of you," is not a recipe for good things to happen. And they hate him. And then there's this dream that says, "We're binding sheaves, and my sheaf rises up and yours lay down." And things happen in dreams that aren't like real life, obviously. But the message is clear. He's going to be the predominant one. And then this second one, and they really hate him. And at this point, they probably think this is just him showing off. He didn't have any dream. He's just telling us. But even Jacob says, "What's the deal? You think your mother and I And this is how we figure he's the youngest, because if his mother's still alive, Benjamin hasn't been born. But you think your
So
mother,
things aren't in order. So Rachel is probably still alive on this part of the story. And so it also goes to show you how far apart age people. So Benjamin is going to be at least 17 years younger
yeah.
than Joseph.
But he says, you think we're going to serve you too? Your mother and I are going to bow down to you. That's the sun and the moon. But it says at the very end, his father kept in mind what he had said. Now, Jacob has to give some credit because he knows about that prophecy that said the younger or the older would serve the younger with him. But I was reminded when I read that about Jacob kept in mind what he had said. Do you remember Mary kept these things and pondered them in her heart about a son and you know the things that she had been told about that? So Jacob doesn't rule it out. But you know, this is trouble brewing with him.
So he's probably rebuking Joseph for talking about it, not that he's rebuking Joseph because he doesn't think it's true. He's like, wow.
That's a good point. I think that's probably what we should get from that, you know, maybe it's true, but you shouldn't, I mean, going and telling everybody it's not smart, not wise.
Hey, Scott.
Yes, sir.
And obviously, he's a pot calling the kettle black, right? He's already made it known to all the other 11 brothers that Joseph is his favorite. So I want to tell him, don't be boastful, don't be, you know, talking outside your scope, and I'm saying, like.
And he's done the same thing. And I'm going to work on being able to get better sound, you know, microphone back to the back there. But Mario has a good point. The pot calling the kettle black. Exactly. He's kind of chastising his son for something, and he's just about.
Well, and the other idea to remember is this repeated idea that all these parents have favorites. I mean, remember Esau was Israel's favorite son, and his mother's, and his wife's favorite son was Jacob, and that caused trouble. I mean, this favorite son business seems to cause trouble down.
Well, if you remember, Isaac had an older brother, and he got sent away, Ishmael, and he got sent away, and Isaac winds up being the one who inherits, and that causes a whole lot of problem that echoes down through the millennia.
So when we're reading this part, do we read as earthly people, or are we reading this in terms of the message in this whole book? That this is in God's hand, this plan is one plan, and it's moving through the centuries, so that we don't have to be calling each other names or warnings for them to be careful what you say to your brothers. This is out of your hands anyway. In the spiritual world.
How do we reconcile? And Gene's question, you know, do we see this as earthly people or God's plan? How do we reconcile when God, through his providence, through his grace, makes use of us or someone else, even though we've done the wrong thing, even though we, you know, so it's some of both. I don't think God causes people to do some of these bad things, and yet we're his instruments. And so, you know, Gene, that's one of those questions for the ages. Mary and I had kind of, I don't want to say trouble, I don't know how, some other time it's another story, but we wound up meeting through a series of events, and you have to look at our life before and think, and Mary's kind of, you know, we have this detente, we won't hurt each other because we were both married before, and both had a situation that even by biblical standards we were justified in the divorce. We had a bad situation, and then we met in a way that is inexplicable, and so you say, well, God works all things together for good. So even when we mess up, even when we do, there's a way. I always think of it as you have a child and the child does something, you want to say, okay, let's see what we can do with this now. Your life is not over. So how can we fix this? And I have that image of God and us as children. So Gene, I don't know how to answer you. It is both. Clearly what Jacob does here is not a good way to treat your children and everything, but it's the only way that the next part of the story that I can think of, clearly God could have worked it out another way.
But it reminds me of trying to read this passages with Jesus in the public square talking to you, but for these ears. And here we are, just what is the point that's really to be taken to heart when we read the stories?
God is in control and we're not.
God's in control and we're not. Yeah,
God is in control and we're not.
when we see the next part of this, when Joseph winds up in Egypt and things happen the way they do, and in fact, the other brothers wind up having to bow down to him. I mean, he is that this long plan works. Sometimes even when we are not necessarily doing the right thing. So for me, you're right, God is in control. And even though we're broken, he uses it. He works things together. To me, that's the message. God's in control, but it doesn't let us off the hook. It doesn't say we get to do whatever we want to because God will work it all out. That's also not the point.
And the point that keeps hitting me about is the longevity of God's plan. We live in such an instantaneous world that we think things happen right away, prayers are answered right away, things come out right away. But I mean, these are decades and centuries. And I mean, you know, this happens and then we will see, I mean, it'll be decades later till these words become true, decades.
But if you want to know what to take from it, if I could choose what message to bring from this, it is knowing that we are broken, knowing that we don't always do the right thing. Look for a way to serve God. Actively search for that instead of saying, I'm going to wait for God to reach down, sort of pick me up by the head and move me over here. If the point is that God uses us, then look for a way to serve. I have known too many people over the years, lots of them, who say, well, God's not going to use me because I have done all these terrible things. And that's a cop-out. That's an excuse that says, I don't have to do anything. No, look for a way to serve God. And the one thing that they do, the one thing we just saw was Jacob telling everybody, I'm setting up this altar to Yahweh. Get rid of your idols, get rid of your amulets, get rid of your stuff. As for me and my house, we serve the Lord. Well, serving is an active thing. It's not passive.
Sometime later, Joseph's brothers had gone to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. Israel said to them, are not your brothers pasturing the flocks of Shechem? Get ready, I am sending you to them. I'm ready, Joseph replied. Then Israel told him, go now and see how your brothers and the flocks are faring, and bring word back to me. So he sent them off to the valley of Hebron. And when Joseph arrived in Shechem, a man found him wandering in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? I'm looking for my brothers, Joseph replied. Can you please tell me where they're pasturing their flocks? They have moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph set out after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Now, Joseph's brothers saw him in the distance, and before he arrived, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to one another. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal has devoured him. Then we shall see what becomes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue Joseph from their hands. Let us not take his life, he said. Do not shed his blood. Throw him into this pit in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him. Reuben said this so that he could rescue Joseph from their hands and return him to his father. gonna stop there. So-
That's a good place. And I don't remember if we skipped it or if we haven't gotten there yet, but there's a point where Joseph, the fair-haired boy, gives a bad report to
Yeah, we
his,
have already
to his
said
father,
that.
huh?
We have already said that.
And so basically, the other older sons are working the animals, in the pastures, and Joseph comes home and tattletales to his dad. They were goofing off. They were, they snuck over into a town and they were drinking instead of watching the sheep. I don't know what he reported. They weren't getting the job done. And he goes back and tattletales. This is also not a good way to win favor with your older brothers. And so here's a point. All of the other brothers are out pasturing their big flocks. And notice they're up around Shechem. This is the place where they killed all the people. And they've gone back up there because you have to go to new pastures. They'll eat all the grass up, and Joseph is not with them. The favorite child gets to stay home. And his dad says, hey, your brothers are out there. Go have a look. Go spy, not spy, but go look in on them and come back and tell me how things are going. And he sends Joseph in his fancy coat to come be the overseer of his older brothers. You just have to see it. Well, the brothers see him coming and they can't miss him because he's wearing the coat, right? You know who's coming. Nobody else has a coat like that. And they hate him. And they're out, it's one thing when we're back home and dad might know about it, but we're way, way away from that. So we're going to kill him. This is going to solve our problem of having this young punk
Tell on us.
tell on us. We're going to kill him. And Reuben, the one we're just told just a few paragraphs ago that slept with his father's concubine, Reuben at least says, let's not get his blood on our hands. Throw him in a pit, let nature take its course, but that way his blood is not on our hands. And there's the rationalization.
But then it says the reason he said that was he was going to go back and actually rescue Joseph.
And he was going to take him back to his father.
And I can't help thinking he's doing that so his father, who's mad at him for sleeping with his concubine, will forgive him.
No, but that's what I love about this, about really starting to look at these as people. This is the stuff that we do. And it's not unthinkable, just what Mary said, exactly that he's going to win favor with his dad by bringing the son back. And so he says, yeah, don't kill him, throw him down in the pit. And I'm gonna, knowing the whole time, but he's saying, let's not get his blood on our hands, right? But in his mind, he knows what he's gonna do is sneak back in, drag the kid back home.
So when
That's trying to alter the definition of sin.
Yes, Gene, what I started with, absolutely. Is it really a sin if we don't kill him? I mean, we threw him in a pit, anything could happen, right? It's not really killing if we throw him in a pit. That is the story of humanity. And you're exactly right. Alter the meaning of what's really a sin. And that's why when I say sin is that which separates us from God, see, you can't skirt the issue by saying, I didn't really kill him, I just tossed him in a pit. God must have not seen. Exactly. And if you say it's what separates us from God, though, clearly throwing him in a pit with the intention of killing him is still killing him. And what does Jesus say later? I tell you, if you thought about it in your heart, you're just as guilty as if you had actually done it. This is so consistent. You see the things that Jesus teaches is to deal with these situations.
Didn't something similar happen when they were going from Egypt to Israel? Another very similar story about they were gonna, put somebody in a pit and then they were gonna let him not die. I can't remember.
I'll have to go look.
Yeah,
You stumped me.
This is sounding very familiar. to me.
I'll see what I can
Something
do.
we studied before.
So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors he was wearing, And they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty with no water in it. And as they sat down to eat a meal, they looked up and I saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying spices, balm, and myrrh on their way down to Egypt. When Judah said to his brothers, "What profit will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And they agreed. So when the Midianite traders passed by, his brothers called Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes, returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone. What am I going to do?"
So the pit, do you mind if I digress just a little bit, tell you a story about the pit that they throw him in, about the place where they are? We were in Israel. We went on a company tour on buses, and everybody got out and they were going on a hike. I stayed to take pictures because there was rain in the desert in the distance, and I stayed with the camera, and everybody went over a hill and disappeared. And then I realized, I looked down over this ridge, all the buses were gone. I was there and nobody knew.
This was not a good day.
And I actually have a picture of them up on the ridge right before they disappear from sight. Well, they had given instructions, but in Hebrew, and I didn't speak enough Hebrew. So I'm stuck out here on this hillside. The buses are gone. They've all gone into a place where they're going to have the reception that night. She's with them, and suddenly somebody says,
Not because I was like leaving him. He said, "You go on." And I wasn't being a mean wife. And then they're like, "Where's Scott? Where's Scott?" Go ahead.
and so, you know, you think about that place where they were going, they had gone to Jerusalem and they're going home, and they look around and say, "Where's Jesus?" Well, it happens because it happened to me. And they said, "Where's Scott?" And Mary goes, "Oh no, he's back out in the desert out there." And everybody flipped. I mean, because it's a dangerous place at night. There are things like pits. And they, you know, they were, one of them was at the IDF, they were going to call out helicopters or something, but they're all jumping in their Jeeps and stuff, and they're going to go out and find me out in the desert. Now, the thing is, I wonder, did they think I'm stupid? Or is this a normal thing for people to go? There's a road there, people. All I had to do was stay on the hard part. And I knew I was going to wind up someplace. That's a whole other issue. But the pits, they were really worried because you don't want to be out in this countryside at night where you can't see. This kind of stuff is there. And all I'm doing is telling you that this story of there being a pit, a convenient pit, they're out there. So they dump him in, and then they start thinking, you know, killing him is good, but we might as well make a few shekels off of it, right? I mean, it seems sort of a waste. We could sell him and it accomplishes the same thing. And besides, isn't he our own flesh and blood? I mean, isn't this ridiculous? They're planning on dumping him in a pit to kill him, but suddenly they grow a conscience when they start thinking about we can sell him. And these Ishmaelites are descendants of Ishmael. These are, you know, and they're going down to Egypt. There's a big spice trade that goes across this place. So yeah, that's what they do. They sell.
And this is, remember here, the brother that talks here is Judah. Judah's the one that comes up with the idea, let's sell him instead of kill him. And Judah's tribe is where David comes from, and that is where Jesus comes from.
So Reuben, the one who said, you know, don't kill him, dump him in a pit. Reuben's the one, he's come back to do what he said. He was going to come back and pull Joseph out of the hole and send him home or take him home
for it.
and get credit for it. And he comes back and he's gone.
What does he do? He rips out his.
He tears his clothes, which is a sign of you know, great distress in that thing. And he goes, what are we going to do? How am I going to face my dad now that I've let his most loved son get killed, and he thinks it must have been, and I don't know what kind of wild beast, there are lions in this area, but he thinks, a lion must have drug him out of the pit and taken him off to eat him.
Then they took Joseph's robe, slaughtered a young goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They sent the robe of many colors to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it, see whether it's your son's robe or not." His father recognized it and said, "It's my son's robe. A vicious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will go down to Sheol, mourning my son." So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard.
That'll bring us to the end, but the other brothers know that a wild animal didn't drag him off.
And I'm sure by now Reuben knew
And
too.
Reuben probably knows too that they've sold him. But the idea of taking the goat blood and putting it on the garment, do you ever watch any of these true running real life crime things on, people do stupid things to cover up murders. Even now, without DNA, it would work. There's no way of spotting it. So they say this is how we're gonna. I don't think they had really thought it through. What are we gonna tell Jacob? We kind of have to explain that he doesn't come back. So they do. They take the coat, and apparently the story is that the lion disrobed Jacob or Joseph before hauling him out of the pit. Right? That's the story. But Jacob buys it, and Jacob is inconsolable. This is his favorite son. And they try and cheer him up, and he says, "No, I will go to the grave in mourning for my son."
And we're going to stop there.
We're going to stop there because it's 10. And I hope that seeing this as, real human beings, there's nothing that happens here that I can't look at the world around me and say, well, no, it's plausible. It really is. This is not just some wild story.
And so next week, we're going to skip chapter 38. You can read the story. It's another crazy story, but, and we're going to start back up on 39 because that takes up back to the story of Jacob again. And while I was sitting here, my phone buzzed, and Cheryl, who's been on a cruise for 2 weeks, she just went through customs and she finally got phone service. So she wanted to say hi to everybody.
Oh,
So,
that's
okay.
so neat. That's
Okay.
good. God, we look at these ancient recounts of your people and the beginning of your plan to bring the Messiah, to bring Jesus into this world, to reconcile us, to bring us back to communion with you. And we see in these people parts of ourselves. We see the brokenness. And the thing I would ask for today is that you remind us, that you lay on our hearts the fact that we still serve you and that we can serve you in our brokenness, and that you reach out and place in our hearts that message and that reminder to go and look for a way to serve you. And we see that even in the brokenness, even in the things that get done to us, you take that brokenness and you work it to a plan. And I ask that you open our eyes to that we see in that you love us and that you have your hand on this place. Be with those we pray for, the ones that we ask for healing and we ask for peace. And be with us as we go this week, that we find those opportunities to be that instrument. Amen.
And thank you, guys. You can unmute yourselves. Hope you guys have a good weekend. A good week. As you know, Scott and I are taking off this afternoon for a trip to Arkansas. So we'll have stories next week.
It's good to see you. Diane, it's good to see you this morning.
Yeah, good to see you. We got a cold, rainy day in Raleigh today.
What is she, what is,
Virginia's driving from.
oh, she's pointing at the map, okay.
You guys have fun, Mary.
Thanks, Cindy. I
Have
saw the
fun.
message. Thank you. Yep, safe travels is exactly what we want, but fun.
Thanks, bye.